Okay, thank you, Mr. Steve and Ms. Lisa. Thank you for having me tonight. Before we get started, I just want to let you know a little bit about myself. I was a teacher for about 15 years in the Los Angeles area. During that time, I worked all over Los Angeles, from like Compton, Watts, East LA, all the way to Beverly Hills and a lot of places in between. Through that time, I kind of got to see the foster care system from the educational side, but I didn't really understand much about it. And then I moved to Texas about 5 years ago, and I became an aftercare case manager with BCFS. And this is where I really learned about the obstacles that our youth are facing as they're aging out of care and moving on to post-secondary education and to the real world. I've been in this position for about the last 2 years, and basically what I do now is I go around the state of Texas, either virtually or in person, and I talk about these post-secondary benefits for our youth aging out of foster care. I've been really making a real hard push for to get to speak with the high school counselors around the state. So if you have any connections with your local school districts, definitely feel free to pass my information along. I'd like to talk to them, and so we can get this information out to our students as early and as often as possible. Okay, is everyone seeing my screen?
Yes,
Okay, good.
I am.
All right, so I always want to start with the first thing is House Bill 2537. This House bill went into effect in June of 2017, and it requires all high school counselors to inform their students in foster care about their post-secondary school benefits every year. As I've been talking to different school districts around the state, I've been learning that most of our counselors don't know about this House bill, and they don't know what they're supposed to be sharing with their students. So again, if you have any connection, feel free to pass my information along. I'd love to go out and talk to those counselors. The first post-secondary benefit I'm going to talk about is the Texas tuition and fee waiver. Now, this is a state law, and it waives fees and tuition for students that are attending public schools in the state of Texas. In order to access the tuition waiver, let me go ahead and say this before I get too far into it. There's going to be a lot of disclaimers because there's a lot of gray areas happening right now, a lot of changes going on the state level and the federal level. So just letting you know that. So as of right now, in order to access the tuition waiver, students do need to access it before they turn 25 years old. If they do not access it before they turn 25 years old, they can lose this benefit. That is of right now at this moment. Once they do access it, and by access, I mean just take one college course at a state-supported school, they lock this benefit in for the rest of their life. They can go get as many degrees as they would like. They can go to school until they're 99 years old, if that's what they prefer. Now, the disclaimer part is that there has been another bill passed that is going to lock this benefit in for life once students take their preparation for adult living classes. This is not in effect as of right now, but there has been a task force put together, and they're supposed to report back in November of this year of how they're going to roll it out. So at this moment, it's still the 25 age limit. I also do want to let you know that any adopted students, they would, as long as they're adopted out of state care, they have this locked in. As soon as they're adopted, it's locked in for the rest of their life. They don't have to access it before they turn 25. That makes sense. So with the tuition waiver, there's no age limit to enroll. If you have any early graduators, they would also be eligible. And then there's also no limit on credit hours. Students just need to take that one course to lock it in for the rest of their life. And then it's not dependent on GPA. As I've talked to some colleges around the state, there has been some confusion there as well. No one can ever take this waiver from them. It does not depend on their GPA. They can actually fail every class that they ever take, and they'll still have access to this tuition waiver. Of course, they may not be able to get into the schools that they want, but they will never lose this benefit. And then for the students that are thinking of leaving the state of Texas, but maybe taking online classes at a public school in Texas, they would be eligible for the tuition waiver as well. So here are some the eligibility requirements for the tuition and fee waiver. If a student hits any one of these bullet points, they will be eligible for the waiver. As you can see, it's pretty broad. I'm not going to go over all of those bullet points. You are definitely welcome to a copy of this presentation, and I've also put it in the chat. So if you can access it from there, that would work as well. So as you can see, the tuition waiver is really broad. Most students that touched foster care will qualify for that tuition waiver. So the program that I work for is the Education and Training Voucher, or ETV, you'll often hear it called. Excuse me. So this is often confused with the tuition waiver, and unfortunately, a lot of our students will either use one or the other. But these are two different benefits, and they can use them at the same time. So the Education and Training Voucher, or ETV, is a federal need-based benefit. So students do have to exhibit a need in order to access ETV funding. More disclaimers. Right now, for this fiscal year, we are going to be funding up to $12,000 per school year, or excuse me, for this fiscal year. And I say fiscal year because this fiscal year is kind of going to bleed into the 22-23 school year. So yeah, if I mention school year, sometimes I slip up. Just keep that in mind. This is for this fiscal year. Now, this is the disclaimer part. These are COVID funds. The maximum amount used to be $5,000. We received COVID funding and it was bumped up to $12,000. Right now, we are waiting for written guidance from the state of Texas in order to proceed in funding that maximum amount. So that could happen as soon as we get off this call. It could happen 3 months down the line. We're just waiting on that guidance. Once we get that guidance, we'll go back and fund any students that were eligible for over the $5,000 amount, if that makes sense. So students can use ETV funding first for housing and any utility responsibilities that they have. And then any other funding would go to their tuition next. Those things have to be taken care of. The federal government just wants to make sure that our students have a roof over their head and they have lights on during the semester. And then of course, students that are attending private schools or technical vocational schools, they may not be able to use that tuition and fee waiver. So that funding would go there next. Once those things have been taken care of, any other leftover funding goes directly to the student, and they can use it for personal living expenses, for childcare, books and school supplies. Most of our students will buy a computer at some point within their ETV funding. If you have any students that are thinking about buying a computer, just make sure you let them know they can only buy one computer during their entire time of ETV funding. So they really want to get a good computer that's going to last them a long time. And then it can also be used for that transportation, meaning they can buy a bicycle, they can buy a bus pass. The federal government does not allow them to buy a car with the ETV funding. And that's just because so many students will go out and buy the first car they see. It winds up being a lemon, and then they're without their any transportation and they're without their funds. So they can't buy a car, but if they already have a car, they can use it for car maintenance, car insurance, car registration, things like that. So another change to COVID was the raise in the age eligibility. So the former age used to be 16 to the month of a student's 23rd birthday. Now, for this fiscal year, it's going to be from ages 16 to the month of a student's 25th birthday. And unlike the tuition waiver, the eligibility requirements for ETV are much more narrow. In order to access ETV funds, a student would either have to have aged out of care, they would have to currently be in foster care or extended foster care, or if they were adopted, they would have to be adopted after turning 16 years old. If they were adopted even a day before they turned 16 years old, they will not qualify for ETV. And another change that came down this year, students can now only use ETV for a maximum of 15 semesters. So for this fiscal year, it will be 15 semesters. ETV will end after 15 semesters or up until the month of a student's 25th birthday, whichever one comes first. Okay, so with ETV, students can use it for dual credits in high school. If you have any students taking dual credits in high school, they only need to be taking one dual credit course in order to be eligible for ETV. Once they graduate high school or get their GED and move on to post-secondary school, they do need to be taking at least 6 semester hours in order to qualify for ETV funding. And because ETV is a federal fund, it's good for most schools around the nation, as long as those schools have been in business and accredited for at least 2 years. And that includes private schools, technical vocational schools. So here's kind of a breakdown of the similarities and the differences with the tuition waiver and ETV. The tuition waiver is a state law. It's only good at public colleges and universities in the state of Texas. It doesn't actually provide any funding. It waives tuition and fees for students attending public school. And then once a student locks it in right now, before the age of 25, they get it for the rest of their life. And then with the tuition waiver, there's no grade requirement. Students can never lose that benefit. With ETV, on the other hand, it is a federal need-based fund. So by need-based, if students are accepting those loans, they may lower their need, and they can definitely lower the chances of them getting the maximum amount that ETV can provide. So we always tell our students, turn down the loans unless it's absolutely necessary. With ETV, it's good for most post-secondary schools in the nation, as long as they've been in business and accredited for at least 2 years. And then with ETV for this fiscal year, the maximum amount is $12,000. And again, for this fiscal year, students can access ETV up until the month of their 25th birthday or after 15 semesters, whichever one of those comes first. And then with ETV, students do have a little bit of leeway as far as their grades, but after their 8th semester, they do need to be making satisfactory academic progress, and that satisfactory academic progress is determined by the institution that they're attending. If they lose if they lose ETV due to not making SAP, they can bring their grades back up and possibly get ETV again. Just an example of one of our students that uses both of these benefits. We have a student that's attending Texas State. She's going to school full time. She's getting her Pell Grant. She's receiving her ETV. She's using her tuition waiver. She's also working two full-time jobs, and she's going to school full time.
Which campus is she attending? Red Oak or Waco?
Texas State in San Marcos.
San Marcos?
Yeah. Yeah, so this student at the beginning of her sophomore year had already saved up $20,000. And of course, for the students coming from foster care, they're not going to have mom and dad to go back to. She's a really extreme example. Most of our students are just using this funding to pay their rent throughout the school year. But that just shows you how a student can really maximize. Now, she's not saving her ETV funding. I do want to mention that. She was spending all of her ETV funding on what she needed for school, and she saved everything that she made on her 2 jobs. So the first thing students need to do in order to access ETV is to apply for financial aid. It is a requirement starting this school year, the 21-22 school year, For students that are seniors, they do need to fill out the financial aid application before they can graduate from high school. We just want to make sure that they fill out the financial aid application as close to October 1st as possible. That way they can make themselves eligible for all those first come, first serve grants and scholarships. And because they are coming from foster care, a lot of time they'll get put to the top of those lists. For those students that may need assistance filling out their financial aid application, it's always best to send them to their transition centers. We've talked to some education specialists at these transition centers from around the state, and they have said it is best to go to them because if it gets filled out incorrectly, it's just a lot more hassle for the youth, and we want to make this process as easy as possible for our students coming from foster care. A lot of times they'll go to their high school counselor, and their high school counselor just doesn't know that they're coming from foster care, or they just don't know how to fill it out correctly for a student coming from foster care. So always best practice to send them to the transition center. For those students that may not feel comfortable going to the transition center or is far away, they can also go to their local college. Even if they don't plan on attending that school, they can go to that school and go to that financial aid department. They may have to self-identify as a student coming from foster care, but they should receive assistance with that FAFSA. Again, it's always best practice to send those students to the foster care liaison for that school. That way we can make sure that they get it filled out correctly. And then again, accepting those financial aid loans can really negatively affect how much ETV a student gets. So we always tell them to take all this free money and turn those loans down. The next step would be for our students to apply for ETV. And they can do that on our website at texasetv.com. On our website, there are both downloadable versions and online versions of the application. Of course, we want our students to just go ahead and fill it out online. That way our coordinators get the application instantaneously. The really big thing about the application is that there's a space for trusted adults on the application. So you can have your student add your name and your email address, and you'll get all the correspondence that they get from our ETV coordinators. As a case manager, when I was a case manager, this was a really big help. I would get those emails and I could see exactly what the student needed, and I could kind of help them through the process before they even got frustrated with it. So really important. And they can add as many trusted adults as they want. We also have a chat feature on our website. So if you're on our site during business hours and you have any questions, any general questions, you can use that chat feature and get real-time answers to the questions that you have. So these are the deadlines for the ETV application. The deadline for the fall was October 1st. For the spring, it's March 1st. And for the summer, it's going to be July 1st. Now, I do want to let you know we always have extensions through the ends of each one of these months. So the hard deadline for this spring semester is going to be March 31st. We don't like to advertise that to our students because they're going to wait till the last minute to get those applications in. But just so you know, if you're ever in doubt, if you think you may have missed a deadline, just have that student go ahead and apply anyway, and we'll let them know whether they missed that deadline or not. And our students will also have to turn in some other documentation, but these are just the deadlines for the application. They have a long time to get all that other paperwork in. So these are just the deadlines for the application. So just some things to keep in mind when you have a student applying for ETV. They'll only need to do one application per school year. Every year after that, they'll just go in and update their application. They do need to check every semester that they plan to attend. A lot of our students will sometimes check off one semester and think that they're going to get the entire amount in that one semester. The federal government actually doesn't work like that. They actually get penalized for only going to one semester, and they're only eligible for a third of the maximum amount. So we always want to make sure that our students are applying for at least 2 semesters on that application. And if let's say they maybe don't go to that second semester, they don't get penalized, and they make themselves eligible for that full amount in that first semester. Students, we do need students to put their full legal name on their application in any documents. We have a lot of students going through the name change process, the adoption process. They do have to put their full legal name at the time that they're filling out the application. They also need to fill out the entire application, and they can always ask questions using that chat feature if they have any questions while they're filling that application out. Once students do fill out the application, at the end, there's an option to save and continue or to submit. If students don't click that submit button, we don't get their application and we can't begin the process. Once students do submit that application, they're going to have to turn in that other documentation, and they don't need like a fax machine or a fancy scanner or anything. All they'll need to do is take a screenshot or a picture with their phone and just email that right over to their ETV coordinator. We just need to make sure that they get the entire document in that picture or screenshot and that our coordinators can read it. And then once they submit all of their documents, we do encourage them to keep all of those documents just because they have a lot of sensitive information on them. And then if there was any problem in the transmission, we want to make sure the student has those documents to resend. And then once a student does submit an application, we're going to need the full 7 business days right now. We have 4 coordinators for the entire state of Texas. So they're super busy right now, especially with all the broadening of the eligibility requirements for ETV. So we are going to need that full 7 business days to process any applications or any paperwork. So students do have to turn in that supplementary documentation. It's on a case-by-case basis, but here's a core list of what they're going to have to submit. They are going to need their verification of eligibility and their tuition and fee waiver. They can get both of these from their DFPS caseworker or from the PAL coordinator for your region. They're also going to need their financial aid award letter for those college students. Of course, the dual credit students won't need that financial aid award letter because they won't be receiving financial aid. They'll also need a copy of their class schedule. And then the budget worksheet, the request of funds form, and the direct deposit form are all on our website. And we'll kind of go over those in just a second. This was another change that came down during the past year. We have moved to direct deposit. So students do need a checking account in their name in order to access ETV. For your students that may be transitioning from fall and now they're looking for ETV funds in the spring, they'll just need to submit their new class schedule, an unofficial transcript showing their grades with their GPA, and they'll also need to provide that updated financial aid award letter and a new request of funds form. So one of the documents that you can find on our website is the budget worksheet. This is a document that our students have a lot of trouble with. I do want to let you know, especially for our freshmen, they are going to need help through this process. It's just inevitable. But they really get stuck on this budget worksheet, and it's not as serious of a document as they think. It's not set in stone. They can always go back and update their budget worksheet. It's just a plan for how they want to spend their ETV funding. It shouldn't include any other forms of income, no part-time jobs, no scholarships, no grants, just for their ETV funds. And then, of course, the students should budget for the semesters that they checked off on their application. And then for those students that are still in foster care, they cannot budget for any living expenses. Really important. There was also another change this past year that really affected our supervised independent living students. Excuse me. There was an amendment written into the ETV guidance that basically says that our supervised independent living students can no longer budget for any of those living expenses or for transportation. So unfortunately, a lot of our SIL students, they were eligible for ETV, but they were coming out with a $0 award amount. This is something I really hope changes. I hope that people start pushing this up to the state level, because I think when they made this amendment, they didn't have our supervised independent living students in mind. I think, you know, they just didn't realize that not everything is covered by the state for those SIL students. So just some things to keep in mind. This is an example of the budget worksheet, and as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. None of the amounts are down to the penny. Everything is rounded off. And then, as I said, a student can always go back and revamp this. We know that changes can happen throughout the course of a school year. They can always go back and update this. So for your students, what we want to see now is that they're budgeting for the maximum amount of $5,000. Once we get that written guidance, of course, the students will budget for the maximum amount of $12,000. So the next form is the request of funds form. This can also be found on our website. And of course, I don't expect you all to remember all this. This is just so you've seen it. If you're ever helping a student with this stuff, you've kind of seen it, and you can kind of guide them through it. The request of funds form is just a form to let us know who we're funding, what the funding is for, and where we need to send the funding. So for those students that are requesting funds for housing, they also need to include the first and last page of their lease or a renting together contract. And that renting together contract is for those students that may not be on the lease. Maybe they're staying with grandmother, staying with a friend, and they're not on the lease. It is a legally binding contract, and that's just to make sure that, that those students aren't illegally evicted throughout the semester. If they're requesting funds for utilities, they'll need to provide a copy of their utility bill. And then for those students that are over the age of 21, or those students that are still in care, they'll just do one request of funds form, and we'll do a release of funds to the student. So here's an example of the request of funds form. This used to be really confusing too, but now we kind of made it look more like the budget worksheet. So up at the top, this student is requesting funds for rent, and that at the top, that's the apartment complex name, and then that's the apartment address. And in the budget worksheet items, they just asked for $1,000 to pay for rent for that semester. And then we would send that check straight to the apartment complex. Excuse me. So just some things to keep in mind. ETV funds are not emergency funds. Students do need to get their applications in and turn all of that paperwork in as soon as possible. It's really important for this fiscal year, just because once we do start distributing those COVID funds, they are going to run out. So it's going to be really important for our students to get that paperwork in as soon as possible so they can get in line to get that maximum funding amount. We don't like to advertise this to the students, but receipts are not required. We never ask for proof. We used to. That was before I came on board, so I can imagine what a mess that was. But we do not require students to let us to show proof of what they bought with the ETV funds. The maximum of $12,000 is not guaranteed. If students accept those loans, they may lower the amount of ETV that they're eligible for. And then for those students that only check one semester, they're only eligible for 1/3 of the maximum amount. So we really want to make sure that they at least apply for 2 semesters. Another disclaimer, I'll tell you right now, if you need to call our coordinators, they are probably not going to answer. But we just want to make sure that our students know that if they do call, they need to leave a message. They're not going to return calls without a voicemail. And they are required to get back to anyone calling within 2 business days. And for your students, we just want to make sure that they speak slowly and leave their full name and contact information twice. This is probably not the best way to get in contact with the coordinator just because they're so busy. But if you do have a student that wants to leave a message, it's probably really important for them to be really specific right now, so our ETVs coordinators can have an answer for them as soon as they get on the give them that return call. Okay, so the main mode of correspondence between our coordinators and our students is going to be through that email. So it's really important that our students get a free, reliable email account that they can always access. A lot of our students will use their high school email, or they'll use their college email, and then they either graduate high school or they transfer colleges and they lose that email address. We can't get in contact with them to help them through the process. So really important that they get that free, reliable email account that they can always access. And then again, we just moved to direct deposit this year. So students do need a checking account in their name in order to access ETV funding. I do want to mention supervised independent living. I kind of touched on it earlier, but of course, this is a way for students to stay in extended care. Well, this is a program that's offered through extended care for those students that qualify. And the great thing about this is that a lot of the colleges are now adopting supervised independent living on their campuses. In fact, all of the A&M schools in Texas have supervised independent living now. So students can move into the dorm, they get a meal plan, they live just like any other student, but they don't have those living expenses to account for. And they have somebody coming to check on them. They kind of have that safety net of foster care, and they're not thrown out there in the real world already. I do want to mention Texas State Technical College. Texas State Technical College is one of only 2 technical vocational schools in the state that's both a technical vocational school and a public school. So students can go to any one of these campuses and they can use their tuition waiver and their ETV. The only other technical vocational school that is public is the Lamar Institute of Technology, and they only have 1 campus in Beaumont. Again, these campuses, I'm not sure which one of these has supervised independent living, but each campus has a foster care liaison. I also want to mention the University of North Texas up there in Denton. And basically this school has a great foster care liaison. Brenda Sweden is great. But they also have a summer bridge program where they take up to 15 students. They haven't been full yet, so there's no waiting list, but they take up to 15 students coming from foster care. And basically students live in the dorm during the summer. They take a small course load, and I actually go up there and help them with their ETV applications. But basically it's a way for those students to engage, get some friends, kind of get acquainted with the campus. And then when they hit the fall semester, they hit the ground running. I also want to mention Texas A&M Corpus Christi, just because it's a really cool campus. I think it's the only campus in the world that inhabits its own island. And then this was the first school to adopt the supervised independent living program. And that, of course, set off a chain reaction to where all of the A&M schools have the supervised independent living now. Great foster care liaison there as well. So if you have any questions about getting a SIL started, that would be the person you want to talk to. I also want to mention the schools in San Antonio. We're part of a pilot program that it's called the Bexar County Fostering Educational Success Program. And basically, this is a program that provides funding for anything and everything that's going to help a student be successful in school and not drop out. This is a great program. We're hoping it goes statewide soon because we've been having really great results. A&M is a part of that program, and they have supervised independent living. UTSA is also a part of that pilot program. They also have supervised independent living, and the First Lady of UTSA is actually the one that spearheaded this program. So a really great place to go for information. And then the Alamo College system, our community college system, is also a part of that program. They do not have supervised independent living yet, but they are working with outside apartment complexes to get that going. I also want to mention really quick that these schools are, I know that are out of state, they're Ivy League schools, but if you have a student that has the grades to go to one of these schools, they've now revamped their financial aid programs. So now they're offering free tuition to students coming from out of state. Of course, if you do have a student coming from foster care, you want to make sure that, and this out of state free tuition is for all students, not just students coming from foster care. But if you do have a student coming from foster care, you want to make sure that they take that one college course at a school in Texas, a public school in Texas, so they can lock in that tuition waiver. But if they have the grades to get into one of these schools, it'd be a great opportunity. I do want to mention the other requirement is that their parents make less than $70,000 per school year. And our students coming from foster care can take ETV with them. So here's a map of the DFPS regions. There's at least one transition center in each region, and no matter where a student is from in the state of Texas, they can go to any transition center around the state of Texas. This is the most important part of the presentation, really getting these students connected with their transition centers. Again, I've talked to so many school districts around the state, and they don't even know that these transition centers exist. This is where our students are going to find their case manager. Just being a former case manager, I know how much case managers help the students just get life started. They're going to help them get their ID. They're going to give them access to all of their aftercare benefits and their post-secondary benefits. There's housing assistance at transition centers. There's transportation assistance. There's always a Texas workforce advocate on site to help them with employment. And then there's always an education specialist on site to help them fill out that financial aid application or apply for colleges. And then I'm not sure if you heard, the most recent numbers I heard were that 50% of our youth aging out of foster care wind up homeless within the first 2 years of aging out of foster care. So I know at the transition center here in San Antonio, it's a safe place for some of our homeless youth to get off the streets during the day. They come in, they get some food. We have a small kitchen where they can fix themselves something to eat. They get to work on the computer, take care of anything they need to take care of online. Just really, really important to get them connected with that transition center. The transition centers for Region 3 are in Dallas and in Fort Worth, and they're both run by the TRACK program. Here's the information for Fort Worth. Here's the information for the ETV program. We are housed out of the transition center here in San Antonio. Right now we're closed down due to COVID, but you can still dial that 877 number. Just enter the region that you're calling from and you'll be directed to the coordinator for your region. The coordinator for your region would be Sarah Christopher. And again, it's probably best to give her, if you really need to get in contact with her, give her a call and give her an email. If you have any specific questions about any one of your students or where they are in the ETV process, you want to contact Sarah. And if you do have a student that goes away and leaves your region, they may have a different coordinator. This is my information. I'm definitely a lot easier to get in contact with than our coordinators. So you can definitely feel free to email me, call me, give me a text. I'm not going to have the most up-to-date information if you're looking for specifics about a certain student and where they are in the process. But I can help answer any general questions or hopefully at least point you in the right direction. This is our program director, Monica McDonald. If at any time you can't get in contact with the student's coordinator or myself, you can always contact Monica and she can point you in the right direction as well. This is the information for the preparation for adult living coordinator for Region 3. This is Rebecca Daniel. And that's who you want to contact if you need to get a student's tuition waiver or the verification of eligibility. For Region 3B, this is Taylor Davis, and she's from the Our Community, Our Kids program. And you can also contact her for that tuition waiver or verification of eligibility. You also have 2 education specialists. The one for Region 3 East is Carolyn Marshall. And for Region 3 West is Normal Eves. And those are, if you have a student that maybe needs representation at their ARD meetings or their special education meetings, you can contact those education specialists and they may be able to attend. Again, our website is texasetv.com. And if you have any questions on our website, you can always use that chat feature. This is where students are going to find that online application and they can submit it and we'll get it instantaneously. We're also using Remind to send out reminders about these deadlines, about just different things going on. There's so many moving parts with ETV right now. If you want to get those reminders or updates, you can join our CASA class for Remind. And all you need to do is text at CASA ETV to 81010 and you'll get those reminders. For your students that may want to join Remind, we also try to make it fun for our students. We do trivia right now. I'm kind of swamped right now, so I haven't done any trivia lately. But once I get a partner, again, I'm going to start doing trivia, and we send out prize packages to those students that are some of the first students to answer correctly. But we also send out those reminders to our students, and if they want to join, they can just text at ETV21 to 81010. I'd also like to invite you to like us on Facebook. This is where we're going to post some of those reminders as well. We also do the trivia on Facebook for our students, but you'll see a lot of the current events, things that are going on with ETV. We have information on schools that are doing really innovative things or that just have great programs for our students coming from foster care. And then if you would like me, if you have anything going on in your area that you would like me to post on our Facebook page, I can also do that. So just send me over a flyer and I'll put it right up there and it'll go out to the entire state. Excuse me. This is just for your reference. These are some scholarship links for your students. I have 2 pages of those. And then these 2 scholarships are offered through DFPS. One is for freshmen, one is for upperclassmen. And these scholarships are available when funding is available. And then here's just another page of resources. If you're looking for a supervised independent living program or a transition center somewhere else in the state, you can always visit those websites. And then College for All Texans and Texas Youth Connection they're really good websites for our students as well. Have any questions?
Hey, Drew, I was just going to add a couple of things. You mentioned the 2 schools. I think you said that do technical training and accept the tuition fee waiver. I do know that Tarrant County College and NTCC, I never can get it right. While they wouldn't call themselves technical, they do have quite a bit of technical training at both of those places. And the other thing I was going to add, I've been through with 2 kids now accessing all three of these things, helping them access all 3. The real power is between supervised independent living, tuition fee waiver, ETV, and the Pell Grants. There's an answer for almost any kid coming out of foster care, whether they choose extended care, if they refuse to do extended care. If they want to go to school, there is money to all but pay, if not allow them to save up extra money by combining, different programs, these 4 different programs together. And if anybody's got a kid and just questions about that, I'd be happy to help answer some, at least answer probably the first wave of questions. Anyway, why don't we throw it open to questions for Drew?
Mr. Steve, real quick, that second school you mentioned, you mentioned Tarrant.
Up in Gainesville.
And that was, and the other one was North Texas
Tarrant County College.
Okay. Got it.
I know they both have the whole welding and automotive and a lot of those kinds of things in addition to their classes.
NCTC also has that foster care liaison who is really pushing that they've got services for our foster youth.
Great. Great to know.
Questions for Drew?
Drew, one of the programs you mentioned that they could do it for 15 semesters. Now, if they go to school for 3 semesters and then take a semester off and go back for 3 more semesters, is that 7 or 6?
That would be 6.
Okay, so it's semesters that they attend.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
That might come into your, it really doesn't come into play for too many of our students, but for those dual credit students, if they're thinking of taking dual credits and they're still in care and they may not get as much funding or they may not need as much funding, they may want to think about applying for ETV to kind of save those semesters. They may want to use those later on for, graduate school or something.
Drew, I have a question for you. You mentioned that our youth need to have a checking account. Along with that comes with a lot of documentation that generally doesn't come without a scramble, right? Can you think of anything that like you see over and over again in those supplemental documentation that the kids are scrambling to get? I'm thinking social security card, driver's license, right? That kind of thing they need once they have the checking account. But is there anything else?
I guess
I'm trying to imagine what's on that supplemental documentation that we need to be helping them get.
Really big would be the financial aid award letter, especially for those students that wait till the last minute to apply for financial aid. That's why we really push them applying for financial aid as close to October 1st as possible, because then they wind up waiting on that financial aid award letter. Sometimes, they see those loans being offered, they click accept, and then they later want to go back and change it. So that's another thing that they really scramble at the last minute to get together.
And again, the FAFSA form, they can start filling that out October 1st, and your deadlines are March-ish. You said there was a little flexibility there, but we're not telling everybody. So March 1st, right?
Yes, for this spring semester, it'll be March 1st.
And that's typical every year?
Yes, that hasn't changed since I've been with the program.
So Drew, I'm curious about that deadline. Spring semester started in January. So they can apply up to March after already having attended,
Yes, they can.
Okay.
They can, all the way up until March 31st. That's the hard
I'm just
deadline.
not sure how that would work because the tuition needs to be paid before then for sure. So that means maybe they've got some other thing in play to cover that particular semester that they're in, that this would be a fallback. I'm not sure how does March apply to spring semester when that tuition is due in January?
Right. That's kind of up to our students to get that stuff in.
Okay.
Most of our students, especially if they're applying late, they usually have that tuition paid, or that tuition is waived with the tuition waiver. That's kind of up to our students. We actually can have a student apply for, let's say, the fall semester and not turn their paperwork in until the end of the summer. And we still have to go back and retroactively fund them. So students can wait till the whole school year is over and still get funded for those semesters.
Wow. Okay.
They just have to have that application in by the deadline. Otherwise, we can't go back and help them.
And you made a point
But then that
that,
money goes to them. Let's say they had some savings or somehow they got those semesters paid for, so that money would be deposited to them
Right.
to
If
cover
they,
those charges, reimburse them, if you will. Okay.
correct. If they are under the age of 21 and out of foster care, if that makes sense. Because those students do also have to provide proof that they had their housing paid for. So anyone under 21, you have to prove that you have your housing paid for. You have to give us a ledger or something that says, you know, I paid my rent for these months. Or they need to send in that renting together contract.
This is if they're trying to do it in arrears, right? I mean, they're
Right.
after the fact. Okay.
Well, either or. If they are requesting funds and they're under the age of 21 and out of care, they do need to provide proof of their living situation.
Which is the lease or the contract that you
Yes.
referenced. Okay.
I have a couple questions, two questions. The first one being, you made a point that if they accept the loans, that can affect their level of need, and so they wouldn't actually get the ETV, correct?
Depends on how much
Right.
how much loan, yeah, how much they take out in loans. It's all put into a calculation.
Do
And
grants also affect it the same way if they accept
do.
other grants? Okay.
they do.
All right. And my other
but-
question is,
Oh.
go ahead, but what?
Okay, I was just gonna say, but we encourage them to take those grants, take all that free money, that's fine. Just don't take those loans that you have to pay back.
So my other question is, you mentioned that at one point you were talking about their parents have to make less than 70,000, right? What if we're talking about adults who were given PMC? They don't legitimately have adopted parents. Their parental rights were terminated to the biological parents. Do we account for the income of the PMC holders? Right?
No,
They don't.
just like on that financial aid application, I mean, that would all be determined through that FAFSA.
Okay.
But yeah, just like for any other student coming from foster care, they would check that, that box that asks if they're coming from foster care, and they wouldn't even be asked about any of their parents' income anymore
Okay.
throughout the application.
For a kid in PMC, it takes about 20 minutes to do the FAFSA. It's simple.
Yeah.
And, unless they've somehow managed to get a job where they're earning large amounts of money personally.
Right.
Otherwise, it's check one box and which colleges you want it sent to, and it's pretty simple.
Drew, another thing, you mentioned that the language went through the last legislative session that changed the availability of funds for youth who are in SIL.
Yes.
Can you give us some more information on what was changed and what needs to be changed back?
I guess now this was not like legislation or any, this was not legislation. This was kind of like an amendment to the legislation that was already in place. But whatever they changed in that wording, it basically says that our supervised independent living students used to be able to budget for those living expenses and transportation, but they are no longer able to budget for those things. Again, I think it was because, whoever went over that contract was just thinking, their students are in foster care, they don't need any living expenses, but that's not true for all students in foster care, especially our extended foster care students.
So it didn't make supervised independent living students an exception.
Right. It did not. And
All right.
And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of students leaving supervised independent living in order to get the ETV funding. They rather go out on their own and get the funding than stay in supervised independent living and not get any funding.
That's crazy.
It is.
Because the SIL covers a whole lot more money than than a ETV does. So I
Yeah,
guess
but-
that's why we
yeah.
want to help them.
Yep, our students don't understand that until it's too late. Any other questions or comments?
So you mentioned that PAL coordinators, when our kiddos are having their PAL meetings, is this sort of stuff being presented to them?
It should be.
know?
They have their circle of support, and then they have their PAL training. I also go around the state and I talk about ETV to our students doing their preparation for adult living classes. But it's a long day. It's usually packed into one day, chock full of information. And unfortunately, a lot of our students, and some of our students are getting this information when they're 16 years old. They got 2 more years. By the time they, they're getting this information. It's just how well is it sinking in?
So as we kind of approach this time frame for any of the kids in our program, is it best to like remind them and get them set up with the transition center? Do they, need to contact them and make an appointment? Or I'm just thinking that if, in my particular case, it's probably been presented to her, maybe not. But now we're actually approaching our senior year, right? So now's when it gets serious and we need to start looking at deadlines and stuff. Does the PAL coordinator help with that? Or should they go directly to the transition center for contact?
Go directly to that transition center. That they're going to be able to connect them with everything. You can start sending those students to the transition center as early as 16. The only thing is they're not able to access any benefits. They are eligible for that case management, but they're not able to access any benefits just because they're in care. For the most part, our students are in care when they're still 16. But yeah, it's a good idea to get them acquainted with their transition center as early as possible. Plus, most of the transition centers have some fun activities that they have. They're always doing giveaways, and it can be a good social atmosphere as well.
Especially if they're going to leave care.
Yes.
If they do extended care, they're going to get enough probably other help. But if they're going to leave care, track is the only way they can get any help.
Yes.
So Drew, I have one more question. We are in Region 3,
Yeah.
but clearly most of our kids are not, right? They're in Houston, they're in, wherever they may be, right? They're in Houston, they're in Austin, anywhere else. Seems like many of our kids are not in Region 3. When we talk about their PAL coordinator, are we needing to contact the one in Region 3 because their case is in Region 3? Or do we need to be contacting the transition center, the PAL coordinator, the whatever, where they're located? Or are we talking about the school that they want to go? I'm very confused.
Okay. So, as far as for ETV, students will be assigned a coordinator according to where they're attending school. So that's for ETV.
Where they're going to school for high school, or where they want to go to school for college or ETV?
For college.
Okay.
Or if they're taking dual credits.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
For as far as like to get a student's tuition waiver from the PAL coordinator for the region, then you probably want to go through that student's region of origination. Does that make sense? To get that information.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay.
I got a question. Can we get copies of these slides or?
Yes, I can send. I'll definitely forward them to Steve, and then I also put a copy in the chat if you can access it. Sometimes you're not.
I'm making it easier on you. I've already copied it to my computer, and we will have it up on the CASA website through volunteer resources. So you'll be able to access it through there.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Drew. Having that at the
Thank
top
you.
of the page made it a lot easier just to know what to do with it next. So thank you.
Okay, good, good.
The whole presentation was incredibly information overload. You know, you gave us a lot of information, but having that so we can go back to it. Does anybody else have any more questions for Drew? All right, Drew, thank you for joining us
Thank you,
this
Drew.
evening.
Thank you, Drew.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Kicking, buddy.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for having me. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Again, feel free to pass my information along as well.
We hope you get a
Thank you.
helper too.
Yes, soon.
All right, thanks, Drew.
Thank you.
Are we done or are we going to keep going?
Actually, Drew, just that you know, now we're moving on to the second hour, and this is just conversation amongst the advocates to kind of do peer-to-peer support.
No problem.
All right.
Have a nice evening.
You too, thank you. All right, yes, we are continuing on, and I am going to stop recording.